All right. Well, I'll bring this meeting to order. Darn it. I had to wake up Steve. Yeah, so we're gathered today. This is an informal meeting. So we are going to have a presentation by Mr. Scott Jarrett today about elections. So I think it would be good to just bring you up to the table or to the speaker, and let's talk about planning activities for the Elections Department. Welcome, Mr. Jarrett.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, and I appreciate your time this morning and allowing me the opportunity to discuss our planning activities or the Elections Department's planning activities as it relates to the upcoming August primary election. We as a nation, a state, and a county are facing a health crisis that has not been seen in generations, and the related economic outfall, all with the challenges that election departments across the nation are planning for a series of summer and fall elections that could potentially have historic turnout. And as that relates specifically to Maricopa County, the second largest voting jurisdiction in the country with about almost 2.4 million voters, and this upcoming August primary election, it's likely to be the largest or significant in-person event since the governor instituted that shelter-in-place order. So if voting turnout projections are correct, and we've made some preliminary ones, it could be about 700,000 voters that would vote in cast a ballot in the August primary election. And if COVID-19 wasn't prevalent, we would anticipate over 100,000 of those voters would likely vote in person on election day. And to prepare for that number of voters, and potentially we would have anticipated maybe over 300,000 voters to vote in person on election day in the upcoming November general election, we would have implemented or instituted about 500 precinct-based polling locations that would have included 40 vote anywhere centers. However, given COVID-19 and some of the challenges that we're experiencing, and I'll go through some of those as we continue through the presentation, that's no longer a viable option. And so the election department went back to the drawing board and really looked at what could we do to provide accessible, secure, reliable voting, but most importantly, safe voting options to allow voters to choose how they wanted to vote safely. And what the election department is moving forward with, and what I would like the board to consider, is moving from that 500 polling locations to a vote anywhere, vote center model that would include 75 to 100 vote centers. Now, that in order to be able to implement that and to be able to accommodate turnout, we're looking at opening those for about 10 to 14 days of continuous voting that would include weekends and evenings, as well as letting voters know of their options to vote early. Now, some of those factors that are driving us to have to make these decisions. This was not the approach that I would have taken. I mentioned we would have gone to it if COVID-19 had not been in the world. We would have gone to about 500 voting locations. But everything that we're considering is related to safety and making sure that we have and can provide those voters safe voting options. But there are also some logistical challenges that are driving this decision. And some of those are the number of ballots that and there's a paper shortage in the world right now. And this predates COVID-19 due to the way that we've gone to an online nation. A lot of our newspapers have not been ordering paper. And so that's caused paper mills to not be available. So we've had to put a long lead time in our orders for paper. So we've looked at how many ballots that we would need with anticipation of many voters making a request for an early ballot and not wanting to vote in a polling location. And in order to be able to provide the number of ballots for the August and November general elections, we needed to identify opportunities to be able to have more ballots available. So if we went to a traditional election, a precinct-based election, we would have to order around 700,000 ballots just for those precincts, those pre-printed ballots, even though we would only anticipate about 100,000 in-person voters. So that's about 600,000 excess of what we need. And if we did go to a vote center model, we'd only need to purchase the ballot on demand stock, about 200,000 ballots or individual pieces of paper to produce those ballots. So that would save us about 500,000 in ballots to meet that anticipated demand for early ballot requests. Also, our existing polling location. Right after our March presidential preference election, our facilities acquisition team went to work and started contacting the facilities that we had just used in the last election to see if they would be willing to provide us in a polling location for the August-November general election. And the vast majority were non-responsive. And a handful of them said, yes, they would be willing to provide us a polling location, but with a caveat that COVID-19 did not exist in the world. So we went back again to the drawing board and determined what polling locations could we use and would provide a safe voting option. And many of those traditional locations were not large enough for us to implement physical distancing. So looking at 6 feet between each of our check-in stations, 6 feet between voting booths, 6 feet between ballot on demand technology, and 6 feet for queuing. So we determined that we would need voting locations of at least 2,500 square feet to be able to accommodate that based on a 9 site book check-in model, 20 voting booths. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, how we came to those determinations and what those numbers needed to be. But really looking for those new voting options. So our existing polling locations were no longer going to be viable for a traditional election in the upcoming August primary. Also, our poll workers. The vast majority of our poll workers, over 65%, are over the age of 60. And those poll workers, according to CDC and medical experts, are in that high-risk group when it comes to COVID-19 if they were to contract that disease. And if we went to a traditional model, we'd need over 3,600 poll workers to work that election. With the revised model, we'd only need about 1,000 poll workers to work that election. Also, state statute requires that we have poll workers, especially in the inspector role and in the judge role, and those are the supervisors. They really manage all the operations in a polling location, that they have prior election experience. But it's not only statute, it's operational need that drives for those poll workers to have that experience. Because if if there's something that goes wrong in a polling location, a process isn't followed, equipment isn't set up correctly, it's because we probably did not have an experienced poll worker or experienced inspector or judge. And even our inspectors and judge have a tendency to be up there over the age of 65. So by moving to a model where we don't need 3,500, 1,000, it's much more viable for us to be able to recruit the poll workers we need to work that election. Also, the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors approved brand new tabulation equipment. So with that comes new equipment in our polling locations. So from a training standpoint, we would have wanted to have as many of those poll workers attend in-person training as possible so they could have that hands-on experience with the equipment. Well, with a smaller footprint of polling locations, we can now still provide that in-person training to those poll workers, but we can implement social distancing. We'd only have to train 200 to 300 of those poll workers versus over 1,000 to 1,500 of them. And then that creates some other opportunities for us to use our spaces at McTech, which I'll go into in the future as well. And then also just the cleaning, the personal safety equipment, and the cleaning supplies. So if we recall back to the March presidential preference election, this was one of the primary challenges that we had with obtaining this equipment and those supplies in order to provide those at all of our 229 polling locations. And that required us to, because we did not have those, we had to reduce the number from 229 to 148. We don't want to end up in a similar situation for the August primary, a much more complex election. So reducing those numbers provides us a greater opportunity and more viable path to being able to obtain those and also not take away that protective gear from our medical workers. We just need a lot fewer of those. So some of the benefits to a revised model is we are going to be able to provide more access to voters. And at first, that doesn't seem to make sense. How are we providing more access if we are revising the model and providing 100 voting locations versus 500? And it's a simple sort of math equation. If we are able to provide 75 locations, let's say, for 10 days, the minimum days that we're looking to open those, that'd be 750 voting options versus 1 day of voting where we had 500, and then we also had those 40 vote centers open for a week before. That'd be about 700 voting or in-person options for voters. So it does create more access. Plus, we're looking to open these voting locations early, have them open on the weekends, even open during some of the weeknights. And then those voting options, so if someone is going to their grocery store or they're getting off work, they're able then to go and vote right after those events, which may provide them more availability or more options. It also improves safety. And how it improves safety is it allows us to identify those locations that we can implement that physical distancing. With the 500 locations, that wasn't a viable option to get 500 locations that provided physical distancing, but we can do it with 75 to 100. Also, it allows us to get those cleaning supplies and the signage in those locations, the masks, the hand sanitizer, all of those types of things to improve safety. It also improves reliability. Again, going back to the March presidential preference election where we weren't able to provide the full 229 locations that we had planned for the PPE, we're identifying locations that would likely not cancel on us in that last minute, so much more reliable. Plus, if we have 100 locations that are very similar, that have similar processes, similar technology, that helps us train the poll workers consistently, as well as that support staff, those troubleshooters, those T-techs that are supporting that equipment. It all makes it much more reliable while maintaining the security that we've had with all of our elections. We've proven that in the past that we can use this ballot on demand technology, so it does maintain that security. We're not going to new technology that is untested and that we haven't used before. And then also, unlike other jurisdictions that have not used an all-mail approach, Maricopa County has been voting by all-mail for several elections, going all the way back to the early 2000s. And we've, in partnership with the Recorder's Office, have really refined those processes to make sure that mail election is a secure way of voting and verifying that signature to make sure that it can be confirmed and that identity verified before it is counted. So another factor that was really driving whether we could, in addition to safety, whether we can pull off a successful election using this model was what turnout would look like. And could we accommodate the number of voters that we would anticipate voting in person on election day? And so we've done some high-level analysis. We'll continue to refine it as we get closer to the election. But in looking at potential our voter registration numbers, we used the amounts of about 2,450,000. As of early April, we were around 2,380,000. So that would anticipate an increase in the number of registered voters. Also, if we look at prior turnout from 2016 and 2018 August elections, we could anticipate that there could be between 110 and 116,000 voters if COVID-19 wasn't prevalent in the country or in the county. And then that would represent about a 4.75 turnout. So we've done the analysis on whether 75 vote centers versus 100 vote centers could accommodate that turnout. And what we're looking at is that high period, that 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. time frame, where we would anticipate the most voters turning out during the election. And what we found was if we had 75 vote centers and none of the strategies that, and I'll go through some of those in the coming slides, that weren't effective, that we can anticipate about 31.6 minutes that voters would have to stand in line for the upcoming August primary. That'd be at 75 vote centers. At 100, we could get that down to about 17 or just over 17 minutes per voter. However, we would really like to drive that down to under 15 minutes per voter. So that's where that analysis is showing that revised based on a strategy. We can get those down to, at 75 vote centers, 23 minutes, or 23.7, and in a 100 vote center model, under 15 minutes, just over 13 minutes. And that will be contingent upon us being effective in our strategy of having that early vote period, notifying voters that they can vote during that early voting period, that they can vote on weekends, that they can vote in those evenings, and also that we're making them aware of their options of being able to request an early ballot, whether that's a one-time early ballot for the August primary, one-time early ballot for the November general election, for both those elections, or if they wanted to do that permanently. And what you're seeing here on the slide is our in-person voting patterns. So this is where, based on 2016 and 2018 primary and general elections, both those years, where we've had in-person voting patterns. So we will have voting locations even in those blue areas, which represent some of the lower turnout areas, but we were primarily focused on those areas that are red, orange, and yellow, where we've had historical patterns or trends where in-person voters vote. And that's what I'm going to be discussing some of our partnerships on how we're identifying where we're going to be putting these locations. But this is the map and the analysis that will be driving those decisions. So our planning strategies for our polling locations. The first and foremost consideration is making sure that we have ample space to implement physical distancing. So that is at a minimum that 2,500 square foot location. That would allow us to have 9 site book check-in stations, 3 ballot on demand printers, and 20 voting booths. We've gone through and done the analysis to make sure that we can implement that physical distancing in a location that is of that size. We're also, thank you to the board, a few weeks ago, you approved some funding, $500,000 for us to procure some ballot on demand technology. We've contracted with our vendor, Runbeck, and they are in the process of creating that ballot on demand technology. What we identified was we had an affidavit printer in every single polling location. So with that affidavit printer, we were able to retrofit it using a tray extender and be able to turn that into a ballot on demand printer. Every printer would require a laptop, but that came at a significant cost savings over what we had purchased in the past. So it was just over $1,300 per ballot on demand printer versus $10,000 what was purchased in 2018. So a significant cost savings, even though that total came to about $500,000 for us to be able to create 100 vote centers for the August primary. We're also partnering with schools, cities, and county departments in some of our traditional polling locations to be able to provide these locations. And I do have an update. Just as of last week, we had over 45 locations identified for the primary election. So that's really great. We recently worked with Superintendent Hoffman. She is contacting all of the county superintendents of schools and sent out a survey, asked them if they're willing to participate. We're also working with the county superintendent's office and the Arizona School Boards Association to try to identify those schools, because their gyms, their cafeterias would be great options, and it does provide a lot of us to be able to keep those voting locations as close to the communities in which those voters are used to voting as possible. So we're still working through that. We recently heard that the city of Phoenix is willing to provide us their convention center for use for 2 weeks before the August and November general election. Same with the city of Mesa, willing to provide their convention center. We're looking at options in the West Valley, and then we're partnering with the county's real estate department through the county manager's office to identify potential retail facilities. Now, this is not a cheap option. It would be very expensive. It could potentially be, a first estimate is about $500,000 that we would need just to get about 20 locations. But these retail facilities would provide us, for us to provide those locations in that heat map area. That's where we would target those. They would also be able to provide us the opportunity to have training in those, our poll worker training, great parking, and then pulling our training from the McTech facility. And that's important because we will have a large amount of temporary workers working in our Maricopa County Elections and Tabulation Center, McTech. And we want to open up that room so we can have that physical distancing in McTech in addition to at our polling locations. So that's the strategies we're using to get those polling locations. And the fact that we're at 45 now does bode very well for us to be able to identify the remaining numbers that we will need for the August primary.
What's your, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
what's your timeline for you're at 45 now, the goal is 100. When do you anticipate you'd be at that magic number of 100?
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Gallardo, so we would like to, in the next three weeks, have all of our polling locations identified. Now, that is a heavy task. We are working with the county's real estate department, as I mentioned, and they are supposed to get back to me this week with some options that they're out there researching. And I will say, a few weeks ago, our original plan was to have 12 site books in every location and 30 voting booths. And that required a significantly larger footprint or layout for every polling location. And as of 2 weeks ago, we weren't able to find hardly any locations that met that requirement. So in revising to that 9 site book model, 20 voting booth, we've been able to identify 45 in just a couple weeks. So I am confident that we'll be able to get there in the next few weeks.
Great. Bill?
Just, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on that, on the polling locations, have you reached out to, or the real estate department reached out to Metro Center and Paradise Valley Mall? Because, you know, unfortunately, we've got a lot of vacant spaces there. I'm wondering if that's another option.
So, Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Gates, that is an option. And right now, with all the real estate, we're primarily asking the real estate division to identify those very viable options for us, and then we'll consider after they've come back to us with what those options are that we should consider. So as far as our poll workers and strategies that we're implementing to obtain the necessary poll workers that would need to staff our facilities, we would need anywhere from 500 to 1,000, really more likely closer to 1,000 if we were to get 1,000 or 100 voting locations. And we are looking to implement shifts so we could have those younger poll workers come work for us. So many of those would most likely still have jobs, so not having to pull them away for those 10 straight days or 14 straight days of voting. We're also looking, we're doing some initial outreach. So we've sent out a survey to all poll workers that have worked the last 2 elections that were under the age of 60. And so far we've had over 700 respond to us saying that they are willing to work for us. So we're just over 70% there in as far as getting those poll workers. So that is very promising. And I believe that in the next few weeks we should be able to reach the targets that we're setting for ourselves. Other strategies that we will use to be able to round out those numbers is the Secretary of State's office is reaching out to substitute teachers that may not be working currently. And they're set up a portal that those substitute teachers then can be sent to our way and their information, and then we could be able to recruit those teachers as well. And then also considering other options, is maybe even if we needed a few members from the National Guard to assist if we don't get that full 1,000 poll workers that we're looking for. Also,
Scott, on the implementation of shifts, you know, we had great success in the PP to invite our county workers to give back to the community a little bit. So do you have that in mind, that maybe those county workers are looking towards, they've already been trained, looking towards on election day voting to be able to, I guess the word is surge around here lately, but be able to surge those in without, you know, deciding they need to work for 2 weeks straight at a polling location, but definitely be able to work that day of part.
so Mr. Chairman, yes, we are looking at those options. Some of those could be on those days that we expect that high turnout. Some of those weekends we could then ask county employees to work those days, definitely assist with election day. And then also that last weekend when we anticipate that those voters that did receive an early ballot want to drop it off. One of the strategies we're looking at from keeping as many voters not having to enter a polling location as possible is purchasing tents, pop-up tents that we could place in those parking lots, and then we'd have to man those with 2 people at each polling location. And that would be a perfect job for our county employees to assist with. We wouldn't want them out there all day, so we would have them work that in shifts and then rotate into with other poll workers. So they would only have to man that for an hour. They'd switch off with our other clerks, and then they can rotate back and forth. But there is options for our county employees still to assist.
Okay.
And I think, Mr. Chairman, I would hope the National Guard would be our very last resort. I don't even know how you go about that. I would imagine the governor would have to be involved in something like that. But nonetheless, I think the National Guard would be like absolutely the last resort, I would hope. But I mean, kind of looking in the crystal ball, I think we're looking at some hard economic times for a lot of workers. I think you're going to continue to see a high number of unemployed workers that may be looking for a 3-week job or something to do something like this. So this is another area in which we can tap into workers that are just, they're struggling right now. They're looking at how can I, earn money to make ends meet. So I think there's a whole pool of workers there that we've never had before that might be interested. And chances are, yes, they're going to be first timers, but usually they're going to be probably younger workers. They're going to be workers a little bit more tech savvy, than some of our retirees. So that's another area that kind of at least start focusing in on, because I really would hope the National Guard would be the very last option. Uniformed or ununiformed, I think just sends just chills down a lot of people's spine when you start talking about having military folks at our voting locations. So just to throw that out.
So, Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Garrido, and that would be one of the last sort of resorts that we're considering at this point in time. I'm confident that we'll be able to get there from our other strategies, but that will be something that is on the table if we don't have enough people to work the election. So another piece to consider is our training. So we are moving to as much training online as possible. So we have a May jurisdictional election right now that we're implementing our very first module of online training, and then we will be rolling out several more of those for the August primary election. However, we will still provide in-person training for that limited number of poll workers that does need to have that hands-on experience with our equipment. So to teach them how to set up those site books, how to set up the accessible voting device, how to set up the precinct-based tabulator, all of that equipment, and then how to operate it. So their experience with that, we are looking to limit the length of that training to be about an hour to an hour and a half, and then limit the class sizes to be less than 10 poll workers per class, and then providing them the proper safety equipment. What this online training allows us to do is be able to move our training from facilities, especially the big room that we have at McTech, so that big room can be used for EV processing and processing those early ballots. We've contacted flood control, so thank you to flood control, but they do have an operations center with a very large training room that we can use. That'll be our first choice, and then the second choice would be some of these retail facilities. I know there's other county departments out there. MCSO has a great training facility, and I think McDOT has a great operational training facility as well that we consider. Other strategies is it's really dependent on a cohesive strategy to be able to pull together a successful election. And this strategy includes, as I've mentioned, our in-person voting options. So in making sure that we have that safe physical distancing at every location. And we've gone through and we've created sandboxes. So a sandbox is where we've set up all of our polling equipment in that 2,500 square foot model, and then the larger one if we were to implement 12 site books. And we've modeled what it would take to get voters through that entire process. Queuing, where they would stand in line waiting for the ballots, how long it would take them to vote their ballot, how long it would take them to stand in line, then insert their ballot into the precinct-based tabulator. So we've really gone through to make sure, identify where those bottlenecks would be, and then make sure that we had sufficient space that we could accommodate physical distancing. Also, our cleaning supplies, we're working with the county procurement office as well as other departments. We've just sent in our information to the Secretary of State. They are looking to purchase cleaning supplies and personal safety equipment for the counties as well. We're really researching every avenue to make sure that we get enough cleaning supplies. So as far as gloves, we would like to be able to issue every single voter that entered a polling location a glove. Right now we're a pair of gloves, and right now we're at about 70% of the gloves that we would need to do that. We're also looking at Q-tips and a single one-time use, and whether those Q-tips could be used for our site books. A very cheap option that could still provide safety, and so far we are able to have them check in. We're just looking to make sure that they can sign in on the site book. All sorts of different options. We're looking at the signage that you've seen in the supermarkets, those stickers, all of those things that we're looking to purchase as far as cleaning supplies. But one real important component of this is voter outreach and making sure that those voters are aware of their options to participate in this election safely. And one of those is to vote by mail and make them aware that they could vote and request, so those non-Pebble voters. So right now there's about 630,000 of those in Maricopa County, and make them aware, and really partnering with the recorder's office to make them aware of their options to request an early ballot, either one time for the August election, for the November election, or permanently. And every voter that does choose to do that does benefit Election Day, because that's less social distancing that we have to implement on Election Day. Less those lines that could occur. If you think of August, early August, it could be very hot, and we want to make sure that we have as short a lines as possible. And if you think about implementing social distancing in line itself at these polling locations, we will have to have 6 feet between those voters standing in line. It won't take a lot of voters to make it look like theirs are very, very long, lengthy lines, even though those wait times may be down to less than 20 minutes. So that is a strategy to help ensure that Election Day is safe and successful. And then I mentioned the physical distancing at McTech, and making sure that we are able to ensure that our EV processing, our signature verification, our tabulation center has physical distancing. And we're looking at those strategies right now. We're partnering with the County Public Health Department so we can ensure that we have a safe option for our poll workers and our temporary board workers that come in to work at McTech.
Mr. Chair, just a question, not to be Debbie Downer here, but we've moved the election. The election's been moved up now, August 4th, and so that is the heart of monsoon season. What if we had a storm hit, knock out? Are we going to have backup energy, backup electricity plans as well, or diverting? If we did have if we had a bad monsoon storm come through, is that anything you guys have thought about?
That's a good question.
So, Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Gates, those are things that for every election, the election department is thinking of. We do have some backup generators and how we would then accommodate those voters. And we've talked with the county emergency management department, and they say that a widespread electrical outage across the entire county is very unlikely. So that's actually one of the great things about this vote center model is if there were 1 or 2 locations that did go out, then we would still have all those other 98 vote center options that a voter could go and vote at. So that is one of the advantages of using vote centers.
Thanks.
Mr. Chairman?
Great question. Yeah.
Yeah, Scott, do we need any kind of special approval to have the 12 to 14 days continuous voting?
So, Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Sellers, right now in statute, the early voting period starts 27 days in advance, and that is legislation that is on the books. There is no special approval. Now, there is that emergency voting weekend right before the election, and the Board of Supervisors can open their polling locations, all the polling locations, for that weekend. Now, it's up to the voter to decide whether COVID-19 presents a situation that would prevent them from voting on election day. And we would still require voters to sign that affidavit saying that they are experiencing an emergency, but there could be other options, whether it is through the governor declaring an emergency that said that emergency voting would be available for voters and they wouldn't have to sign that affidavit. But right now, currently as statute's written, that would be considered emergency voting. Okay. And a voter would have to make that determination, whether they could, that COVID-19 is the reason why they can't vote on election day.
Thank you.
So as far as communication, so we are looking at really 3 areas or themes that we would be communicating with voters. Those are to let voters know that their polling location may look a little bit different. We will have physical distancing in those polling locations, letting those voters know that it may not be in that area that they've traditionally voted for. If we've gone down to 100 from 500, they're going to need to go to their website and find out where that location is. We will be planning to send out to any non-Pebble voter a sample ballot, letting them know where their closest location is, approximately about 15 days. Normally we send it about 10 days before the election. We will be looking to send that out a little bit earlier since we'll be opening so many of those locations earlier in the process, but to inform those voters where they can vote and that their poll workers would likely be wearing some protective gear as well. As far as there is another group of people that we need to be communicating with, and those are our Pebble independents. There's about 400,000 of those in Maricopa County. And to participate in the August primary election, they need to select a ballot. So if they are, even though they're on the permanent early voting list, we can't mail them a ballot until they tell us which ballot they want. So there will be a communication strategy to inform those Pebble voters, those Pebble independent voters, that they need to go to beballotready.com and to select their ballot. And then also to voting in person and letting them know that there are ways that they can select that early ballot. And we've, as a country, as a nation, we've identified that there's a lot of things that we can do from home that we didn't think we could do, whether it's implementing new teleworking strategies, our children going to school and learning from home. Now there could be just one more option that they have available to them, is to vote from home using their early ballot by mail. So those are some of the overarching themes that we'll be implementing to inform those voters of their options on how they can safely participate in this election. And the last piece to this is it's not necessarily going to be any cheaper. So you would think, okay, we're going from 500 locations to 100. This is a cost-saving measure, or we'll be able to save some funds. Well, that's not the case. If you think back to the number of locations, if we have 75 locations that are open for 10 straight days of voting, that's 750 voting options or days. So just from a cost perspective from our poll workers, that'll be more expensive. The communication strategy, there's a cost associated with that. Procuring the ballot on demand technology, as the board has already purchased $500,000, this just for the August primary election. So there will be a significant cost. Fortunately, the federal government did approve the CARES, or the Coronavirus Aid Relief Act, and there is funding that's set aside specifically for elections nationwide. For Arizona, it was $7.8 million. There is a match requirement because it's coming through the HAVA Relief Fund of 20%. That's about $1.56 million that the state would have to come up with to meet that match. We're currently working with the other counties as well as the Secretary of State's office to meet that match. Allows us to go back to any expenditures that were COVID-19 related all the way back to January. And we're confident that we will be able to meet that match without the state legislature having to appropriate general fund monies. So we'll take legislation from the state legislature to approve and appropriate these funds through a bill. So that's what we're waiting for at this point in time, is that approval of that legislation, and then those funds would be released to the Secretary of State and then passed down to the counties to be able to use to pay for and reimburse us for some of these costs that we'll be expending. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman, and the board, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Great, Scott. I'm going to turn towards Steve Chukri. He said he would be holding off on some questions until the end, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Scott, for all your great work, and that of Megan's as well. Just some clarifying points. When we're talking about the 10 to 14 days and the hours thereof, what specifically are we talking about by opportunity of hours being open? You said going into some of the evenings, but not every evening. What's your thought process on that?
So, Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Chukri, right now it's contingent on the exact locations that we get. So we are working with each of them to provide that weekend voting, and some of them are available for us to open up those into the evening hours, some are not. So if we are successful in getting those retail locations, if we got 20, we would control hours. When we work with the convention center, we would control the hours for the convention center. But some of the facilities that we're working with right now, they still put some of those restrictions. So we would like as many locations as possible to be open for that 2-week period before the election. We are looking at most likely a phased-in approach and partnering with the recorder's office, because much of that is that early voting. And in talking with the folks from the recorder's office, they're looking at opening potentially 5 locations at 27 days, and then a second phase of right around that 14-day period, opening up 40 to 50 locations, and the remaining locations would then open in that third phase about a week before the
Okay,
election.
so are we saying 7 o'clock if we can? I mean, we're not going to go to 10 o'clock at night, right? I mean, what?
So, Chairman, Supervisor Chukri, yes, would look most likely around 7 o'clock, 7 p.m. We wouldn't be extending them too late into the evenings. We've got to consider what our poll workers are able to work, all of those factors.
Great. And then, Mr. Chairman, if I might, just a few more. So to clarify, when we're talking about all mail voting going back to 2000, we're really talking about jurisdictional elections, right? When Maricopa, for the most part. I just want to make sure that we clarify that for any of the public that might be watching, where we're saying all mail. We really haven't had just an all mail countywide.
So, Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Chukri, that's correct. We have
Okay.
not had all mail in our federal and county-wide elections. That has been just jurisdictional, but we do have, just in the last 2018 general election, there are about 80% of the ballots that were returned and cast were by mail.
Okay. And then, Scott, too, on the cleaning supplies, I mean, anything we can do, I applaud you with going through procurement and making sure that we're going to be, but that will not be an excuse the public will ever appreciate or expect or tolerate. You go to a bank today, right? They're standing right there with the solution. Right, I'm scared to even sign because they're spraying it faster than I can do it. So it's happening in the private sector. I hope we can emulate that. And then secondly, to Mr. Gates, who was instrumental last year as chairman with our EOA, what is this? This is a hybrid because of COVID-19. And Scott just said something along the lines that it's early voting, so it's under Mr. Fontes' purview. But if we have these voting centers open for those 14 days, right, where we're actually conducting voting, and I know prior to pre-COVID-19 world, that in the East Valley location, we had a polling office open where you could drop off a ballot. I don't think you would actually vote, but you could drop your ballot. I'm not gonna try and get into the definition of what is, but Bill, is there a clarification that might be warranted as to what is actual, we always refer to as day of, now we're talking about days of voting. Is there some kind of clarity in your opinion on that as to who's going to have oversight? And I'm not trying to get into a turf battle, but it begs a question.
Mr. Chair, I think Supervisor Chukri raises a good point, probably a good one for us to get some legal direction on. I think that's probably the best way to handle
Yeah,
that. But I think
yeah.
it's a good point you raise.
Yeah, and just to make sure that we don't have anything, Scott, slip through the cracks as to, well, wait, I thought you were doing that. I thought you were doing that. You had a question about a monsoon. I mean, all these questions are very valid. This is new because to your point, we're going from 500 down to hopefully 100. And it's a different world. We can't have any hiccups. And you did an excellent job pulling off what you did in March, especially with what ensued directly thereafter. So kudos to you on that, and thank you for all you're doing.
Great. Good. Jack, do you have any questions right now? Bill, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, Scott, great work. I mean, this is amazing work that you guys have done. I mean, it's unbelievable what's been thrown at you again and again. So I salute you for that. I just would echo what Supervisor Chukri said about what we can learn from the retail environment. As much as we can make this look like the retail environment that people are now getting used to, from, you know, the stickers on the floor. We had talked before about maybe trays, you know, that people could put their IDs into that you can hand over. The more we can make people feel comfortable is really important. So thank you for that. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about the so we've been talking a lot about the people who are actually still voting on Election Day, you know, Election Day voters, but also those folks that are on the Pebble who go to drop off on Election Day, or we know that happens a lot. Can you talk a little bit about how that's going to be, you know, precautions it'll be taking there in particular, again, so that people feel comfortable walking in to drop off their ballot?
So, Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Gates, so right now we would like to minimize the number of those voters that need to enter the actual polling location. So that's where we're looking to have those pop-up tents and then moving out that early ballot drop-off box to the parking lot. And then we would staff that with 2 poll workers, which that would be a good option for the county employees, especially as that last weekend approaches, where we anticipate that there could be a high number of those voters that have received that early ballot and procrastinated and not filled it out. But we could then provide them that option just to drive up into the parking lot of that polling location rather than having to exit their car and then go into and stand in line just to enter the polling location. So that is the current strategy right now.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I like that idea. I think the security, though, you talked about maybe 2 county employees. We may need more than that. I've just, that would, I like the creative thinking, but from a security standpoint, we want to make sure that that's protected so that people can't get in. And then also your pop-up tents, I like that, but also too, for the people that are going to be waiting in line on August 4th outside, you know, everything we can do. Just there's so many different pieces here, and I know you guys are on top of it, but this alignment of either you know, potential monsoon or just a very hot day, those people being out, we don't want people getting heat stroke and things like that. So again, whatever you guys need to put all this in place, I think is I'm certainly supportive of. But again, great job already so far.
Great. Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great job, of course. Feel very confident when I have you focus on stuff like this. I really do. A couple of things I just want to kind of point out. The whole mega centers, and I think I read an article in the Republic about that, and I think it was our recorder that talked about the possibility of using like the Cardinal Stadium and the Coliseum and the Convention Center. It was tried before, and it really didn't work. And I think for a couple of reasons. One, voters, my opinion, want to be able to park, walk 200 feet, go vote, walk back to their car. When you're using the mega sites, you're not walking 200 feet. You're walking 1,000 feet. You're going up ramps and you're going all that stuff. We did try it. I remember back in the 90s, we did try it with the Coliseum. I think we got 4 voters. This looks good, sounds good, but realistically, they just don't work. So try it. I would suggest, I mean, these are some strange times we're in, so if we have to use them, we use them, but I would suggest we kind of stay away from the big mega centers. The voters just don't want to park a long distance and have to walk in order to vote. That's one. The other thing that I wanted is the messaging, and I think it's important for us as part of that messaging to really to convey to voters that our polling sites are going to be safe, that we're going to comply with, the CDC rules, and we're going to make sure that it's sanitized and all that stuff. As Shukri said, the private sector, they're giving you. I think I went to Fry's, and they had a couple of their employees out there, and they're wiping down the shopping carts before you even walk in, and they're giving you a cart that's already wiped down, and so I think reaffirming to the voters that our polling sites are going to be safe. we are going to take these measures, let it be the trays or whatever we're doing, but that it is safe, that you're not going to have to worry about being infected and all that stuff, that we're taking the precautions. So that's the other thing. The other thing is, and this is where I advocate for District 5. Can we go to the heat map? Go to that heat map one more time. Sorry, guys, this is where I say District 5 is more important than the other four districts. So
I'm wondering how that smaller red spot compares to the larger ones on both sides of that.
No, but seriously, guys, if you look at it, any normal person, they said, okay, this is where people are going to vote in person. So obviously, 100 sites, that's scary to begin with. So a normal person will look and say, okay, we need a bunch of sites out here in the East Valley in District 1, and we need some out here in District 4. I think that's District 4. Yeah. Is that Sun City West? Okay, we need a lot of sites there. But if you look at this gem out here in the Southwest, District 5, it's not red. And there's a couple points here I do want to make sure that when we start distributing where these sites are located, that area, District 5, I would venture out to say, are going to be impacted more likely by COVID-19 in terms of the economic effect. I think these are the folks that more likely are going to be laid off, more likely are going to be on unemployment, are going to be more likely looking for jobs. So they're going to be impacted more. They can even face evictions from their home, losing their cars, all that stuff. So that District 5, from an economic standpoint, it's also more likely to have less transportation options than the other areas. More likely less to have childcare. They're taking care of their kids themselves in their home. More likely to have access to the internet, to even know where the polling sites are at. I know when Secretary Reagan did her community town halls, I went to a few of them, and one of the biggest complaints, at least in District 5, was voters were complaining that the polling places would always change, and they couldn't find out where they were at and so on. And one of the things is their access to the internet, to be able, for us, we jump on our laptops and our iPads and we find out, okay, my closest site is over here. Most families are not going to have it. And also on this site, in this area, District 5 is less likely to have, or more likely to have fewer voters on Pebble than the rest of the area. So these voters are going to actually look for polling sites on Election Day. And there's a lot of barriers that are facing these voters. So, and let me remind everyone, this is a Section 5 area. This is the Department of Justice Section 5 area. So as we distribute the polling sites, don't let the red heat stuff fool us. It's District 5 that we need to that I'm going to be focused on to make sure that voters do have access to the polling sites. They're less likely to have cars. They're having to walk. They have kids at home. They're working multiple jobs just to make ends meet. These are the challenges. So when you talk about weekends and evening voting, I think it's critical, especially if you're only going to go with the 100 polling sites. So as we move forward, I look forward to working with your team to ensure that District 5 is covered, but let's not let this heat map fool us in terms of how we distribute the polling sites.
Okay. Good. Go ahead, Scott.
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Gardo, those are absolutely factors that we are considering as we're moving forward. And I did want to mention a couple things in regard to the City of Phoenix Convention Center and the Mesa Convention Center. And we have our facilities acquisition team this week doing inspections, so ADA compliance inspections, and parking is a consideration. And we've worked with City of Phoenix to be able to provide some curbside parking for those voters that would need, those ADA voters that, so they would have just a short walk, or that they could actually vote curbside. We're also working to get a parking garage that's close across the street that would provide that free parking. But you're right, that parking garage is about 1,000 feet. In the case of the City of Mesa Convention Center, it is closer.
I think I think having the convention center is good for us employees that work down here, and we're here for 8 to 5, and other employees to be able to walk over, on their lunch break or on their break time to go cast their ballot. I think it works in that areas. But when you start looking at other areas, I'm not familiar with Mesa at all. I couldn't tell you where their convention center. I think I've been there before, but I can't speak on behalf. But some of the other, like the Coliseum, that didn't work, and I can't imagine the Cardinal Stadium would work as well. But just when you start looking at mega sites, they generally are sites that are big, and you got to park a distance away from the door, and you have to do a large walk. So just to throw that out.
Yeah, Steve, the convention center in Mesa is the antithesis of what you described with some of these larger venues. You could park within feet, walk in, walk out. It's very convenient, and it's a great part of my district.
But Steve, you brought up a district. We sit up here and we have to do the holistic approach to the county, but we are all representing different districts that we get Scott to ask questions about specific district, because that's who we represent also. So in that regard, on the district side, Sun City West, the recreation buildings, have they signed up yet? Or because those are relatively large. What I worry about is a couple things. Number one, training. These are 65 and older for sure in my district. That's who you see working those. And you talked about training at McTech, and yes, that's fabulous. But will there be training going on in some of these geographical areas too, so I don't have to worry about a lot of my constituents having to come here to train? Will there be some opportunities to train out there in the far-reaching areas? Maybe that's true in Mesa as well. I just wondered the plan there, because I did hear McTech a bunch, but I don't know if I heard satellite areas of which to train.
So, Mr. Chairman, we are actually looking to move training out of McTech, so that would not be where we would be providing the training, and looking at those other options. Some of those would be county facilities, whether that's partnering with the flood control district, but then those retail facilities, if we are able to get those retail facilities, then we can actually set up training in those locations that are much more closer to those voters even in the West Valley and the Far East Valley.
Have you heard yet from Glendale Convention Center or the city of Glendale to see if there's the ability to use it in both ways, a training as well as day of voting?
Mr. Chairman, we have not heard back from them, but we will be reaching out.
We will be reaching out, or it hasn't? Have we reached
I'll have
out
to
yet?
confirm with our facilities acquisition manager if they've gotten in contact with them yet.
The other thing, as you brought up and how retail has changed, and you were talking about the spray bottles, will it work with our equipment? We don't want to damage this high-dollar equipment, Q-tips, the whole thing. But what I've seen out of our emergency services and burn rate through PPE and tracking, that did reach out and bite us during the PPE. We even had to close down some sites because we didn't realize the burn rate of disinfection that was going on in early voting. Is that correct?
So, Mr. Chairman, the primary factor that caused us to need to close down those polling locations.
The order didn't come in.
The order did not come in. It wasn't necessarily the burn rate. We did not receive and now they have started trickling in, but we still need more. Specifically with the masks, the covers of the mask. We're looking at different options, whether we would use those N95 or whether we'd just use the cloth masks, but we're still researching and working with the county public health department on what's the most viable option.
Well, over a 2-week period, I just want to make sure that we learned that lesson. And remember, we all went into the PPE saying, how is this going to work out? And there was all sorts of things flying around about, and some states didn't do it very well. And we were able to, I thought, get high marks on what we were able to pull off during the pandemic, and I'm glad it went well. There were some naysayers out there that thought we were jeopardizing health, but we did all we could, and we pulled off a very good PPE election, and now we have August coming up. So I just want to make sure, if we get those supplies, how are they going to be secured? Making sure that they are available at our highest surge time of voters, that they will feel good, that there's something there, that we've identified it. Today's session goes a long way towards when I talked in my chairman's address, hey, we've got three large elections coming up, and we need to make sure that the public, this goes a long way towards it, that the public knows that we're taking this amount of time, finding it so important that even during the personal spacing issues, I have all five of the colleagues are here getting a chance to ask you, to talk to you about how you're planning, and the world continues to change under our feet every 24 hours, it seems. So the voter has to understand that we are having these meetings, sometimes public, but a lot of times privately with you, just trying to cover all of these issues. That was the first time I thought about the monsoon. We are going to be having an election right during peak monsoon season. So thank you for asking that question, because you might have asked that question to Scott in your office, but I would have never known, and the voter wouldn't have known until today that that's even on our minds. So continue the good work of what you are identifying. Please keep bringing it up to our colleagues. If you get some bad news about locations, especially in our district, you need to let us know so we can maybe reach out to a mayor or two and say, you might want to reconsider that. These large facilities, Steve, I view as a chance to get people out of the heat. If there are lines, that it gets them at least out of the heat and they can wait in a comfortable area. We need to talk about people waiting in cars. I mean, a lot of us are waiting in cars at drive-through locations waiting for our food, and everyone seems to be okay with that. So we might have to realize that might be a part of waiting in line to go do your vote. And how do we shift to that to our laborers that say, hey, I know that you've been waiting, and now's your chance to jump in line and come inside and go ahead and vote. So all of these things that we have to plan. With that, if there's any more questions, thank you very much for the planning session. We look forward to seeing what you bring to us and voting on it so we can continue on towards August. So
Thank you.
all right, thank you. Okay, we are going to adjourn. I don't have to take a vote for that.
We're going to take a vote to go into executive.
Okay, so we are going to take a vote to go now into executive session. Executive session will be held due to personal spacing. It will be held on the 10th floor, so we can go and meet our lawyers and go through a bunch of topics there. Do I have a motion?
So moved?
I have a motion. I have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. Thank you, Steve. Hearing none. Let's go ahead and get up there and start, because I'd like to end our executive by noon, because I didn't provide lunch again. Just warning you.